Hello, a pleasant day everyone. We are now in our midterm in GE5, or known as Understanding the Self. This is Wendelin Baloca Camposo speaking, and I am with my partner Vichy Bayonas Baliar. And today, we are now here to discuss human sexual behavior, which are the solitary behavior and sociosexual behavior. Without further ado, let's proceed to the discussion. Let's begin with knowing what is human sexual behavior. Okay, do you have any idea? Is this term appears kind of familiar to you? Have you encountered these words before? Or today is your very first time to hear it? Okay, to elaborate, human sexual behavior defined as any activity can be solitary between two persons or in a group that induces sexual arousal. There are two major factors that determine human sexual behavior: the inherited sexual response patterns that have evolved as a means of ensuring reproduction and that are a part of each individual's genetic inheritance, and the degree of restraint or other types of influence exerted on the individual by society in expression of his sexuality. Therefore, human sexual behavior are those activities that we humans do, and it can be individual, can be between two persons, or it can be in a group, just to meet our sexual satisfaction and aid our sexual arousal. So there are two major factors that human sexual behavior. What are these factors? Okay, so those are the inherited sexual response patterns, or which is considered as part of each individual's genetic inheritance. And we also have the degree of restraint or other types of influences exerted as expression of one's sexuality. So the various types of human sexual behavior are usually classified according the gender and number of participants. There is solitary behavior involving only one individual, and there is sociosexual behavior involving more than one person. Sociosexual behavior is generally divided into heterosexual behavior, male with female, and homosexual behavior, male with male or female with female. So there are two types of human sexual behavior, and is classified according to its gender and number of participants. When we say number of participants, we are talking about the number of people involved in the activity. So we have first the solitary behavior, which means involving only one individual. From the word itself, solitary, so it means being solo or being the only person who do the deed. And when we say sociosexual behavior, these are those behavior that we do involving more than one person. So it means it can be two or more, like 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. So the sociosexual behavior is divided into heterosexual behavior and homosexual behavior. So what are the difference of this hetero and homosexual? So when we say hetero, you are mixing male with female. It means a pair of opposite sex. But when we say homosexual behavior, it means it is combined of the same sex, like male with male and female with female. Okay, so let us discuss further what is solitary behavior. So let us start with solitary behavior. What is it all about? Or what are the additional information about solitary behavior? So one of the common example of solitary behavior is masturbation, or that the thing that we do in our body just to aid our sexual arousal and meet our satisfaction as humans. So these are the things that we do individually. That means solo or the solitary behavior. So solitary behavior, self-gratification is self-stimulation with the intention of causing sexual arousal and generally sexual climax. Most self-gratification is done in private as an end in itself, but is sometimes practiced to facilitate a sociosexual relationship. So as what I've said earlier, the common example of this self-gratification or it is self-stimulation is a self-masturbation, or those activity that usually those who do not have a partner do in private. So it generally beginning at or before puberty is very common among males, particularly young males, but becomes less frequent or is abandoned when sociosexual activity is available. Consequently, self-gratification is most frequent among the unmarried. So, this solitary behavior, as it said in the note, that it begins at or before the puberty. So each of us individuals have this sexual arousal or this urge to have a sexual activity. So this self-gratification, as mentioned, is very common among males, particularly young males, and it becomes least frequent or is abandoned when sociosexual activity is available. So this solitary behavior are the behavior that is practiced by those unmarried or those singles or those people who didn't have a partner in life who can grant or who can aid their sexual arousal. Okay, so to continue, females also tend to reduce or discontinue self-gratification when they develop sociosexual relationship. There is great individual variations in frequency, so it is impractical to try to define what range could be considered normal. So this self-gratification is not only common to males, but females also tend to do this self-gratification, but they reduce it or discontinue this self-gratification like this self-masturbation when they have social-sexual relationship or when they are in a relationship or have a partner to satisfy their sexual urge or sexual arousal. So as what I've said earlier, this masturbation or this self-gratification have a variation in frequency. So we have that range. When can we call it as normal, or when can we call it as not normal? We do the self-gratification. So to continue, the myth persists despite scientific proof to the contrary that self-gratification is physically harmful. Neither is there evidence that self-gratification is immature behavior. It is common among adults. So there are myths that persist that this self-gratification is harmful, or there is, as a common example, the masturbation is harmful to people and is an immature behavior. But how can we aid those sexual urges, right, if we don't have partners? So that's why solitary behavior happens. So to continue, while solitary self-gratification does provide pleasure and relief from the tension of sexual excitement, it does not have the same psychological gratification that interaction with another person provides. Thus, extremely few people prefer self-gratification to sociosexual activity. So this solitary self-gratification does not provide pleasure or relief from the tension of sexual excitement in compared to those you are going to, have this aid of sexual arousal if with partner or with someone. So that is why there are only few people who prefer self-gratification, because they can't have the same excitement as the excitement they can have when they have a partner in doing the deed. So the psychological significance of self-gratification lies in how the individual regards it. For some, it is laden with guilt. For others, it is a release from tension with no emotional content, and for others, it is simply another source of pleasure to be enjoyed. So as a common knowledge, this self-gratification is just a way or simply a source of pleasure to be enjoyed, especially for those unmarried, for those singles, or for those persons who don't have partners. So So, to continue, since the person is in sole control of the areas that are stimulated, the degree of pressure and the rapidity of movement, self-gratification is often more effective in producing sexual arousal and sexual climax than sociosexual activity, wherein the stimulation is determined to some degree by one's partner. Sexual climax in slope is generally infrequent, seldom exceeding 12 times per year for males and 3 or 4 times a year for the average females. So according to some studies, it is self-gratification is more likely to be effective in producing sexual arousal or the sexual climax than the sociosexual activity. Okay? So for the sociosexual behavior, it will be Ms. Vichy Boyonas Baliar to continue the discussion. So thank you so much for listening to my discussion in solitary behavior.
It's Vichy Boyonas Baliar, and I will be the one to continue the discussion about sociosexual behavior. Okay, so let's start. Sociosexual behavior. By far, the greatest amount of sociosexual behavior is heterosexual behavior between only one male and one female. Heterosexual behavior frequently begins in childhood, and while much of it may be motivated by curiosity, such as showing or examining genitalia, many children engage in sex play because it is pleasurable. The sexual impulse and responsiveness are present in varying degrees in most children and latent in the remainder. With adolescence, sex play is superseded by dating, which is socially encouraged, and dating almost inevitably involves some physical contact, resulting in sexual arousal. This contact, labeled necking or petting, is a part of the learning process and ultimately of courtship and the selection of a marriage partner. Petting varies from hugging, kissing, and generalized caresses of the clothed body to techniques involving genital stimulation. Petting may be done for its own sake as an expression of affection and a source of pleasure, and it may occur as a preliminary of coitus. For example, it may be that those who engage in more sexual behavior also engage in more frequent alcohol use to meet potential sexual partners or to facilitate casual sex or hooking ups. So what is coitus? Coitus means the insertion of the male reproductive organ into the female reproductive organ is viewed by society quite differently depending upon the marital status of the individuals. The majority of human societies permit premarital coitus, at least under certain circumstances. In more repressive societies, such as modern Western society, it is more likely to be tolerated but not encouraged if the individuals intend marriage. Sexual intercourse, also called coitus or copulation, reproductive act in which the male reproductive organ in humans and other higher animals enters the female reproductive tract. If the reproductive act is complete, sperm cells are passed from the male body into the female, in the process fertilizing the female's egg and forming a new organism. What are the different types of coitus? We have here the marital coitus. Is usually regarded as an obligation in most societies. Extramarital coitus, particularly by wives, is generally condemned and if permitted is allowed under exceptional conditions or with specified persons. Societies tend to be more lenient toward males than females regarding extramarital coitus. This double standard of morality is also seen in premarital life. Postmarital coitus, example, coitus by separated, divorced, or widowed persons, is almost always ignored. Even societies that try to confine coitus to marriage recognize the difficulty of trying to force abstinence upon sexuality experience and usually older persons. We have here the extramarital coitus. Continues to be openly condemned but is becoming more tolerated secretly, particularly if mitigating circumstances are involved. In some areas, such as Southern Europe and Latin America, extramarital coitus is expected of most husbands and is accepted by society if the behavior is not too flagrant. The wives do not generally approve but are resigned to what they believe to be a masculine propensity. Most extramarital coitus is done secretly without the knowledge of the spouse. Most husbands and wives feel very possessive of their spouse and interpret extramarital activity as an aspersion on their own sexual adequacy, as indicating a loss of affection and as being. For example, people who feel they are putting too much into a relationship and not getting enough out of it might let their appearance go, or not work as hard to earn money, or refuse sexual access, or refuse to contribute the conversations. The idea is that such actions will restore equity. If these equity processes do occur, they might help to explain patterns of extramarital sex. Additional information about sociosexual behavior. Human beings are not inherently monogamous but have a natural desire for diversity in their sexuality as in other aspects of life. Some societies have provided a release for these desires by suspending the restraint on extramarital coitus on special occasions or with certain individuals. And in modern Western society, a certain amount of extramarital flirtation or mild petting at parties is not considered unusual behavior. Sociosexual behavior would be incomplete without some note of the role it has played in ceremony and religion. While the major religions of today are to varying degrees anti-sexual, many religions have incorporated sexual behavior into their rites and ceremonies. Human beings' ancient and continuing interest in their own fertility and in that of food, plants, and animals make such a connection between sex and religion inevitable, particularly among peoples with uncertain food supplies. In most religions, the deities were considered to have active sexual lives and sometimes took a sexual interest in humans. In this regard, it is noteworthy that in Christianity, sexual behavior is absent in heaven and sexual proclivities are prescribed only to evil supernatural beings, Satan, devils, incubi and succubi, spirits or demons who seek out sleeping humans for sexual intercourse. Additional information about sociosexual behavior. Whether or not a behavior is interpreted by society or the individual as erotic, example, capable of engendering sexual response, depends chiefly on the context in which the behavior occurs. A kiss, for example, may express a sexual affection as a kiss between relatives. Respect. A French officer kissing a soldier after bestowing a medal on him. Reverence. Kissing the hand or foot of a pope. Or it may be a casual salutation and social amenity. Even something as specific as touching genitalia is not construed as sexual if done for medical reasons. In other words, the apparent motivation of the behavior determines its interpretation.
So, do you have any questions or any clarifications about the discussion? Okay, so if everything is clear to you. Thank you so much for listening and watching this video. And we hope that you learn something from our discussion. Thank you so much.